Welcome to Lurking Together, where I cover the craziest and funniest stories on social media. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at stories of terrible and incompetent bosses getting absolutely wrecked by the employees they tried to abuse. In our first story, a lazy supervisor is forced to realize that serving fast food is a crappy job. This is a long one from a few years back when I was a teen working at a generic fast food restaurant while in school. I was 16 at the time and had been working at this store for a year or so. We had this supervisor who was just horrible to work for. He would leave us while we were packed with customers and sit on his phone talking the whole shift. He would only come out to bark orders and abuse us for not working hard enough, and eat the food we were cooking. When customers complained, he would belittle us in front of them, blaming our attitudes. Now, everyone hated this guy. Even the other supervisors hated him. He was lazy, and to be completely honest, I think he only had the job because his uncle owned the store. He would come in to start his shift, plant his butt in the office, and wouldn't come out unless it was to tell you how crap you are and how he isn't afraid to replace you. We were all teenagers working that needed the money for our families. He knew this and would hold our jobs over our head. The store was in a bad area and we were all either supporting our families or trying to stay out of gangs and whatnot. It was open late so we can get good hours in after school. Well, this one particular night we were very short-handed. It was me, my workmate Joe, and our supervisor. Joe and I assumed he would serve customers while I cooked, and Joe made all the burgers and wraps. But no, he came in, planted his butt in the office and told me to cook as well as doing the burgers and wraps while Joe would serve. I protested and said it was too much for me to cover. He completely ignores me and acts as if he didn't hear a word I said. So I protest a little louder and, no joke, he turns to me and says, "Well, if you don't like it, you can kiss this job goodbye." I bit my tongue and returned to my duties, ticked off. Joe was ticked off too. He knew that if the supervisor ran things this way, Joe would receive all the abuse as he was the person out front serving. Like I said, we were in a bad area. Customers often came in drunk and irritable, there's often fights, and we get a lot of homeless people and junkies loitering. Joe knew he was going to get abused by someone tonight, who would possibly throw something at him. Fast forward a few hours into our shift and we are in the middle of our dinner rush. There's a crapload of orders to be made and not enough meat cooked to make it all. Customers are complaining about wait times, and I can hear Joe in the front getting absolutely destroyed by the growing mob of angry customers, whom he is doing his best to keep calm. For the first time in the entire shift, the supervisor comes out to see what's happening. He sees the mob of angry customers who are starting to shout, hurling insults and all. He goes out to confront them and calls me to the front. As soon as I'm in sight of the mob and the supervisor, he starts to berate me, throwing 1,000 questions at me at once. Why isn't this done? Why isn't that done? And he kept abusing me further. Then he calls Joe over, abuses us both, and tells the customers he's sorry we are so incompetent. Then he pulls us both out back. He said, "If you two don't lift your game, you won't be working here any longer. And just because you fell so far behind, I'm taking tonight's pay from you." At this point I wanted to kill him. We were working our butts off while short-handed and he didn't lift a finger to help us. I wouldn't let this slide. It lit a fire in me and I was going to make sure I got paid for tonight no matter what. So I plotted. I planned. I concocted a most evil plan in my pot of payback potions and would soon conjure it into existence. I even asked Joe for help with it and he agreed willingly once I told him the plan. This plan would make us legends of our store. Executing the plan, after the rush was over and we were about to close shop, I went on my break. Remember how I said we had a lot of homeless people loitering? Well, I'm thankful we did. While I was on my break, I convinced a homeless man to come and take a dump in the urinal in our bathroom, and I would get him some free food. He laughed at me at first and asked if I was serious. It took a little convincing as he couldn't believe someone was offering him food for something he normally does for free. He agreed after a bit, but I told him I would have to sneak him in with the help of Joe. I bring him to the sliding doors and signal Joe to distract the supervisor long enough for him to turn his head from the computer screen and cameras. We slip in and make it to the bathroom. When we get there, I tell him to go in and do the deed while I go make his food. He giggled and agreed, then headed in. I headed to the kitchen where Joe was and told him the job was underway, and that I'll need a distraction to get him out once he's done. Joe tells me he will tell the supervisor he is leaving. It will give me a moment to get the homeless man out quickly. I make the guy's food and head back to the bathroom entrance, but he is still not out. He had been in there over 20 minutes. When he finally exited, I caught a whiff of a most foul odor seeping from the bathroom. "What the heck, dude? What did you do in there?" I asked. He told me he may have missed a bit, but the job is done, more or less. I gave his food to him and signaled Joe to distract again. Once he does, I snake old guy out of the store and thank him for his help, to which he replies, "I've been asked some weird crap, but you kid, are messed up." I wasn't about to let my supervisor steal my pay. I was going to make him pay for it. I headed back to the bathroom to check, and I tell you I couldn't have asked the guy to do a better job. I was aiming for a stool in a puddle, but this was something else. It had overflown out of the urinal, down the wall and onto the floor. It was everywhere. Joe swung by on his way out and couldn't believe what he was seeing. I shook his hand and said to him it was a pleasure to work with you and good luck. He left, and I went to confront the supervisor. Once I reached the office I let everything go on him. I swore at him, told him I quit, Joe's gone home, I'm leaving, nothing has been cleaned for close, and someone took a crap in the urinal again. He begged me not to leave while I laughed at him maniacally. I told him to screw off. I said, you want to take my pay? Take the job too. Have fun scraping poop off the wall. I threw my shirt at him, walked out and never went back. I heard from Joe that the supervisor was there all night cleaning everything and was forced to clean the bathroom. Everyone except the supervisor knew what I did and cheered for me. I went down in the store history for the next year, but then it closed after that and was replaced by another generic fast food store. I don't think I would have had the patience of OP here. I would have walked out and quit the minute I was told I wouldn't be paid. But I'm glad OP stayed long enough to carry out this, absolutely brutal, revenge and share his story with us. Good for him. If the manager doesn't want to pay employees, then it's only fair to leave him with all the work. And at that point don't even worry about getting fired. There's no sense in trying to protect your job at a company that will arbitrarily decide not to pay you. In our next story, an abusive and incompetent boss fires the wrong IT person and chaos ensues. So, I worked for this multinational company for over a decade as a system administrator. My responsibility was in the area of manufacturing, mostly for central systems that work on data flow between the manufacturing systems and the enterprise resource planning system in near real time. That's a complicated way for OP to say he managed the software that sent data between manufacturing machines, and other pieces of software that run things like inventory, invoicing, and accounting. Basically, he was the guy that kept all their machines talking to each other so that they could continue to operate. Even though the company had lots of cash for stupid projects, IT budget was always too tight for those expensive, customized data munching systems. So, shortly after starting to work at the company I started implementing my own. I'm also an experienced software developer, and this is one of the reasons my original boss hired me. I won't go into too much detail, but I decided to make the stuff web-based for easier deployment of updates. It worked great, and over time more and more functions got ported into this easy-to-enhance and easy-to-update system. Partly new stuff, partly decades-old software that was in dire need of replacement. After about a decade, this system was rather central to the manufacturing process in many ways, and yes, there were hot standby servers, multiple backups each day and so on. Due to the severe budget constraints, I'm allowed to use open source software for my database. I'm also allowed to use my own open source web system as the base for it all and keep it open source, except for some small, selected parts that are company specific. I'm pleased about that, because essentially, the company is paying me to progress my open source project while getting a friendly and reliable system for me to use at work. I always had the support of my varying bosses over the years, and we changed middle management a lot. Then, in comes another new boss. In the first ever talk we have, he complains about the programming language that the software is written in because that's so outdated. I tell him it's actively developed and used by a number of Fortune 500 companies for their back-end and front-end systems. He's not happy. He also asks me how I do all the paperwork for the project and how my former bosses manage the project. I tell him I do everything by mail, so everything is archived on the archive mail server as per law, and that my former bosses didn't do any management because the users and department leaders are happy about how I manage the project myself. He is livid. A few weeks later, my boss accuses me and my work of acting as a separate company within our company, and it has to stop. It doesn't matter if the whole company approves of my work and speaks highly of me. I have to do much more completely useless paperwork, get approval for every small change or bug fix from 2 people, and the boss is generally a jerk when it comes to my work. He also loudly complains that I work alone on my projects and that I try to ruin the company by doing so. I have it on file that I asked my boss at that time for 10 years every month to hire someone as a backup for me, and got denied every time. You have to understand that I have Asperger's and I'm generally not good at dealing with this stuff. But so far, I always managed. This day is the first ever I left early, crying my eyes out in nearly 25 years of work. More bullying follows, and over the next year my boss starts taking away all of my duties, one at a time. This results in me not always making my 40+ work hours per week. You can only read Reddit so much per day before you start going insane. Now, after everything is over, I realize that was his main tactic after all, to get me fired for not working as long as my coworkers. But it just didn't click with me at the time, because nothing like that had ever happened to me. The boss forces me to train a backup employee near the end of February. I only got 1 day to train him. He's very young and inexperienced, and I complained to my boss that there's over a decade of software development and knowledge about company rules and processes that he doesn't know. He also doesn't know the programming language this entire system is written in. The next day, after having to attend an expensive training course and then having lunch, HR calls me in and tells me it is my last day of work. I don't have the usual 90-day period, but it's my last day of being employed. This is rather unusual in my country and only legal if both parties agree. I agree though, since I get a nice severance package and unemployment benefits starting the next day. I don't mention to HR that I was planning to quit the next month anyways because of the constant bullying. I have 1 hour to clean out my desk and say goodbye to my coworkers. The last thing I do is to have my backup employee delete my accounts, as per company policy, while I watch. This includes my admin account and my web system. I go home, cut all company access to my privately owned public source code management temporarily, then I work through the weekend to basically fork my own project under a new name, renaming all the classes and stuff, and release it back on my SCM under the new name. Just so that the company will have a hard time implementing all the bug fixes and security updates I do in the future. What I accidentally, on purpose, forget to mention in the heat of the moment, is that all the documentation for the web system is also stored on the user account of whoever wrote it. In this case, that's me, for everything. A setting called on delete restrict is active, so deleting a user account with documentation is not allowed since there is a safety feature in the software that prevents deleting admin accounts. But it can still be manually deleted, and my coworker happily types the required command into the database shell directly. He enters the command to delete my account and it works. The normal procedure would have had the person deleting the account assign the documents to a different user before deleting the old account. But what the heck, I was fired and it was the responsibility of the person doing the work, not mine. This was a well-documented procedure and he didn't follow it. As a result, all of the documentation on this system was permanently erased when they deleted my account. A week goes past and then the messages start to flood in. We used a well-known messaging app for real-time communication and also started using it for private messaging as well, since my group are still good friends. Parts of the system aren't doing their job and parts of the manufacturing process has ground to a halt in multiple production plants. The documentation is nowhere to be found and they can't figure out what is wrong. From what I gather, after I left they realized that I had a second account on the system, marked developer account, don't change without talking to the admin first. The new employee deleted it since I wasn't working at the company anymore. This also deleted a number of rather critical maintenance tasks running under that account and the system went belly up. Chaos ensued and emergency meetings were held. The company always held meetings instead of working to fix the problem whenever something went wrong. That's when they started contacting me. New guy. You need to come in and fix the problem right away. Company Central is already on the phone and they are going insane. He adds lots of details on the problem and also on what is happening in the company. Me. Sorry bro, I don't work for the company anymore. New guy. But it's your system. Me. It was my system. Past tense. I got fired last week, remember? I don't work there anymore. New guy. But we are in trouble. Me. First, since I don't work there anymore, you just violated company policy by telling me all that stuff. I could get you fired for that, but I'm not going to since you're the somewhat innocent bystander in this. Secondly, on the day I was fired, HR told me that they wanted to get me out the door right away because a disgruntled worker with my kind of system knowledge is a security nightmare. New guy. But you aren't disgruntled, are you? Me. No. But there is no way for you or management to be sure. Are you willing to take full responsibility if you let me in and I hack your systems? New guy. No. The boss isn't paying me that well, you see. Me. And third, if I help you in any way, shape or form, I might be in deep trouble. New guy. What? Me. See, the company can't do a lawsuit against their own employees if something goes wrong by accident. Suppliers have similar statements in their contracts and are also insured. I'm neither of those, and if I do something wrong, or the company just says I did, I'm suddenly in deep financial trouble. I just can't take the risk. New guy. What if we hire you as an external contractor? Me. I'd have to open a company, get insurance, go through negotiation with your purchasing department to get my company on your suppliers list. Then I'd have to write you an offer which you then have to get signed by 4 people. Which would take, all in all, 2 to 4 months. After which I will have to wait for the money for another 3 to 4 months after that. Sorry, I decline. New guy. Please help. Me and my boss are in very hot water. What can we do? Me. Sorry, I can't help the company, because it would be a risk to me. And it would be against your own company policy to allow me to help. New guy. Pretty please? Me. Tell you what. Call up the company central office yourself. Don't go through the boss, and tell them exactly what happened. Tell them you broke the system by deleting those user accounts on your boss's order. And tell them you didn't know what would happen because you didn't have enough training or experience, and you just relied on your boss's orders. As it turns out, the new guy actually did phone up the company central office a few days later. The boss went through heck, got fired and got himself on the never hire again anywhere in this company blacklist for another expensive stunt he pulled that the company found out about shortly after he was fired. How do I know this? I still have lots of friends at that company and hear stuff through the grapevine. The new guy still has his job, and a new, even more incompetent boss. So he's ready to find a new job. Yesterday, he asked me about planning his company exit. Which reminded me that I wanted to write this post. And here we are. Well folks, take that story as a lesson, and never screw with the people that make your technology work. It's almost never worth it. For our final story, an employee gets subjected to verbal abuse, and gets revenge on their crappy boss. So this happened a few years ago, and I'm sorry if this story is long. I was working as a lab tech in a small manufacturing lab with a girl about my age named Hannah, and our lab manager who was a nutcase named Colin. Colin was a bully, and would single me out for any reason he could. If he felt like I wasn't paying enough attention to my work, he would belittle me in front of all the bottle fillers. He would make me do all the dirty jobs and would generally be an awful boss. He was also pretty sexist, and decided that women should wear white safety shoes and were not suited for lab work. Finally, he was prone to violent outbursts. Anyways, I took all this on the chin, because I needed the job and it was actually nice to work with Hannah and the others around the factory. A few times, however, he went too far. The first time, he decided that he needed to use the funnel I was using to fill up barrels. I found it and took it to carry on with what I was doing in the noisy machine room, so I had headphones on. Out of the corner of my eye I see him marching up. "Why did you take my funnel?" he says. I didn't hear him, so I take my headphones out. He says, "Why did you take my funnel, you freaking idiot? You always have freaking headphones in." I asked him calmly not to swear, and this caused him to figuratively explode with rage. He starts jumping about and getting in my face with his eyes popping out of his head. "I'll freaking swear if I want to, you freaking R-word. You always have headphones in. Why did you take the funnel? I needed the freaking funnel, you freaking jerk." I walked away to get away from him, feeling a little shaken, but he followed me yelling in the same vein until I finally ran away from him and hid in the kitchen, breaking down in tears. I was later told that he could be heard all over the building, even from the noisy machine room. He later smoothed it all over with the upper management, which would be a recurring theme. This was not long before my birthday, so I had a few days off after this. When I came back, he was saying that I was not in his good books for yelling at him, even though he was the one who yelled at me. He said that the bosses will be keeping an eye on me. I ended up writing a formal grievance against him, but it did not end up helping, and he only increased his mockery of me. I saw my first chance for a revenge of sorts when he brought a bottle of chloroform into the windowless and unventilated lab. My chemistry senses started tingling and I asked him if he had done any COSHH forms for this. These are mandatory health and safety forms for chemical handling. He said no. I said he should. He said he has never written a COSHH form in his 25 years of being a chemist. I told him he shouldn't open the chloroform in the lab as it would be dangerous. I had a day off the next day and don't think much of it after that. When I got back, I walked in and the lab reeked of this weirdly sweet solvent smell. Everyone who was near the lab had a headache and there was an unmarked bottle of separated phases of a solution on the desk. My chemist sense is tingling even more. Colin had opened the bottle, exposed everyone to a dangerous chemical, and left unmarked solvent waste in the lab. I was prompted into action. I printed off a COSHH form, filled it in and showed it to upper management. Since management aren't chemists, they don't really understand, but they can see I am concerned. So they go talk to Colin, who smooths it over and comes to chastise me for fear-mongering. I decided it was time for me to get a new job. After a few interviews, I managed to get a job offer at a university as a lab tech in their research labs for a little more money than I was currently getting. And most importantly, I would finally be free from Colin. About an hour after getting the confirmation email for my new job, the big boss from my current job came down to ask me about a product that went out to our biggest client. They were complaining about getting the wrong flavor. I asked him about the batch code since I kept extensive logs. The big boss told me the batch code and I looked it up. I told him that there is a note on it for a sanctioned flavor change. But, the big boss didn't sanction the flavor change. I told him that Colin approved of the change and the notes are in my lab book. Colin was away somewhere at this time, so the big boss asked me to come upstairs to the boardroom. The boss informed me that the flavor that went to the customer was wrong and the customer was withdrawing their business. He said he needed me to be totally honest with him, so I informed him that I had been given a job offer that morning and that I have nothing to gain from lying. I told him that I was told by Colin to change the flavor, and that I wrote the note in the lab book, which Colin signed off on. He then got on the phone with Colin asking him to explain himself. I was not party to the conversation, but the boss brought the phone to me and said Colin would like to speak with you. I answered the phone and Colin said don't say anything until I get back, we will sort this out together. Lol, okay Colin. Ladies and gentlemen, I sang like a canary. I told the boss about the bullying, the health and safety breaches, and the unsanctioned flavor change. I told him about the fact that I had a good feeling that Colin had done none of the paperwork required of him as lab manager, which the other upper management guy corroborated with the COSHH form I had personally written. They then tell me that they would be dismissing Colin, but as a matter of policy and doing it right, they would be suspending us both pending investigation. They told me not to answer any phone calls from Colin. Throughout the day I had 23 missed calls from him, various frantic voicemails, and several text messages. He eventually came in 5 minutes before the end of the workday telling me that I am not going home until we have sorted this out. He said that I need to tell him what went on before he faces the big boss. The pleading tone and the look on his face when I stonily told him I am going home will last in my memory forever. I looked forward to a morning of video games on paid suspension, but I got a phone call around 11 a.m. and was asked to come into work. When I arrived, I was whisked into the boardroom and told what went down by the big boss and the upper management guy. It turns out Colin tried to blame me for sanctioning the flavor change. This didn't fly with the boss, who had had enough of Colin's crap by now. He then tried to blackmail the boss. As it turned out, Colin had sourced a dodgy supply of flavor and had been putting it into the products. He said that he would go to the press with what he had done. This resulted in Colin being dismissed with immediate effect and then escorted off the premises by police. The boss then offered me a promotion with a £10,000 pay raise, since he decided that I can do a much better job than Colin. I took the offer. TLDR, my boss is a bully who was bad at his job. So I took his job while having the weirdest day of my life. And the moral of this story is to be careful how you treat people underneath you, because one day your fate might be in their hands. Well, that's all for this episode. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what sites and subreddits you want me to cover.